Hello again, friends. So we just talked about the fourth meditation, right, where Descartes is distinguishing between what he calls the true and the false, or what we're going to say when we know something versus when we don't really know it, right? We think we know it, but no, we don't. So that was the fourth meditation. So now we're in the sixth meditation, and we're at the end of our very rapid journey through Descartes' meditation. And at the end of the next lecture, when I talk briefly about Chisholm, we'll sort of do a sum up of how this relates to the package view that we're going to be talking about, that we're going to be picking on for the rest of the summer term. So, two key ideas come out of the second meditation. My fingers look weird there. Or the sixth meditation. So two main ideas come out of the sixth meditation. The first one is Descartes' substance dualism. So substance dualism, never mind, talk about it in a second. So the one idea is substance dualism. The second idea is that we can be reasonably sure that an external world really does exist. So overturning the skepticism from meditation 1. So let's first overturn the skepticism from meditation 1, right? Because that's the shorter piece. And, excuse me, less important for us in terms of the course. So, so in the first meditation, we have Descartes hypothesizing the existence of the evil demon, right? Saying that maybe there's this demon, right? And the demon is constantly deceiving us, blah blah blah. So we don't know anything about the external world, right? So we get that in the first meditation. In the third meditation, we get God exists. And in case you decided to take a peek at it on your own, in the fifth meditation, we get another argument for God's existence. So, one reason, so Descartes gives a few reasons for thinking that there's an external world. Right? So the first thing he does is he dispatches with the evil demon hypothesis. Now, remember this. We have an argument for God's existence. Actually, we've got two arguments for God's existence. And we have the possibility of an evil demon, right? But we don't have an argument in favor of an evil demon's existence. So Descartes says, is there an evil demon constantly deceiving me? And his answer is, probably not. And the reason is because God wouldn't let an evil demon constantly deceive me, because God's not a jerk like that, right? God doesn't deceive me, so God wouldn't create an entity whose job it is to deceive me, at least not without giving me the heads up about it. So, God and the evil demon can't exist together, right? But we know that God exists, so that gives us reason to think that the evil demon doesn't exist. Furthermore, Descartes says, we know that God exists, and when we look all around, I'm gesturing outside as though you could look outside of my window, but you can't since you're not here with me. Furthermore, when we look around the world, we have this really strong impression that when we see something, the thing we perceive is coming at us from the outside world. So, again, my trusty mug. So I look at this thing, right? And it's hard, and it's a little cool to the touch, and I can see it. So I have a really, really strong impression that the sensations I'm having are being caused by an object that exists outside of me, that really exists in the world. And God wouldn't let me have those impressions, those experiences, unless they mapped onto an actual reality. So, because God doesn't cue me into thinking that there is no such reality, right? Because God's not like, oh, by the way, screwing with you, JK, right? Because God doesn't do that, that gives me really good reason to think that there really is an external world out there. So again, we see the importance of God in establishing knowledge of the outside world, right? So that we have some kind of contact with the outside world. Right? I can't know anything about the outside world because I could always be wrong about it. But nonetheless, I can rest assured that it's not just pure illusion, because God wouldn't do that to me, right? God wouldn't do that to us. So that's how we can be sure that there's an external world, right? Or at least, that there's an external world. We'll go with that. Because God, in a sense, acts as the bridge between us and the world outside of us, right? So if this is if this is us, and this is the external world, because the external world is 40, God acts as a bridge between us and the external world, right? And without God there, we couldn't make that leap, right? So God acts as the knowledge bridge between individuals and the world. So that's the first piece. The second piece is the one that's going to be more relevant for us in constructing the rest of the course. So this position that Descartes develops is called substance dualism. Plato talks about it too, so does Augustine, but they don't use this term substance dualism. In fact, Descartes doesn't use it either. But it's the name of the position as it's been ascribed to him. So what is substance dualism? Well, substance dualism is the claim that there's two kinds of substances in reality, right? There's physical substance, which is fleshy stuff, and cups, and reminders to make dental appointments, and pencils, right? That's all physical stuff. There's also mental stuff. So the mental stuff is the stuff that's used for thinking and experiencing. So a key difference between mental stuff and physical stuff is that mental stuff is conscious and it's unextended. That is, it doesn't take up room in space. Physical stuff, on the other hand, is unthinking, is sort of non-conscious, and does take up room in space. So, just as a quick little sidebar here, notice how much this echoes Plato's distinction between the physical domain and the realm of the forms. Right? The realm of the forms is intelligible but invisible. The world around us is visible but unintelligible. For Descartes, the mental stuff is conscious but unextended, doesn't take up room in space. Physical stuff is extended, it does take up room in space, but it's unthinking, right? It's not like my cup is an idiot, it's just that my cup isn't the sort of thing that can think. In fact, no physical thing is a thing that can think. And so that's the conclusion of the argument that we're about to go through. Right? So the argument for Descartes' substance dualism is this. Right? There are two premises and a conclusion. Right? It's another modus ponens argument. So here's the first premise. If I can exist without my body, then I am not identical to my body. Again, that premise is, if I can exist without my body, then I am not identical to my body. I'm not the same thing as my body. First premise. Second premise. I can exist without my body. Therefore, I am not identical to my body, right? I am not the same thing as my body, right? There's Charlie, and then there's Charlie's body, right? Lasser's body, whatever. So, let's go through these premises. First premise. If I can exist without my body, then I am not identical to my body. So this premise is actually pretty straightforward. It goes back to an idea that we find in this philosopher. The reasoning is straightforward, right? It's that if you have two things, and there's something that can be true of one that isn't true of the other, then those are different things, right? So I've got a pencil, got my keys. I can break my pencil, and my keys remain untouched, right? They remain unharmed. Since there's something that can be true of one that's not true of the other, then they're not the same thing. But think about things that are identical, right? So think about two different names for the same person, right? So consider like Batman and Bruce Wayne. Whatever you do to Batman, you likewise do to Bruce Wayne. right? So, if you push Batman down a flight of stairs, you've also pushed Bruce Wayne down a flight of stairs. If you just bought a drink for Batman, you've also just bought a drink for Bruce Wayne. So whatever you do to one, you do to the other, right? So there is nothing true of one that isn't also true of the other. So they're the same thing. So if there's something that is true of me, of Charlie, that's not true of this fleshy body, then Charlie and the fleshy body aren't the same thing. And so what's the something that's going to be true of Charlie that's not true of Charlie's fleshy body? Existing, right? If I can exist, if it's possible for me to exist without the fleshy body, then I'm not my fleshy body, right? Charlie is different from Charlie's body. So, that takes us to the second premise. I can exist without my body. Why think that I can exist without my body? Here, we see the conceivability possibility principle at work again. So, notice the premise. I can exist without my body. Another way of putting that is, it is possible for me to exist without my body. To show that it is possible for me to exist without my body, I have to show that it's conceivable that I can exist without my body. So why think it's conceivable for me to exist without my body? Well, frankly, because I can imagine existing, right? Because I can conceive of existing, but without a body, right? So I can imagine seeing my body on an operating table, right? I can imagine myself from a third-person perspective, seeing my body on an operating table and thinking to myself, shit, I hope this goes well, right? Likewise, I can also conceive of thinking in deep space without any sensory input, right? I can imagine thinking to myself things like 2 + 2 is 4, right? Without any kind of sensory stimulation whatsoever. So these are two cases in which I conceive of existing. I conceive of myself thinking, but my body's not involved in any way. In fact, my body's just not around for all intents and purposes. So that is to say, I can conceive of myself existing and thinking without having a body. So, the conclusion of this little mini-argument is that I can conceive of existing without my body, therefore, it's possible for me to exist without my body. That is to say, I can exist without my body, right? So, the conclusion that Descartes arrives at is, I am not identical to my body, right? That I can continue to exist even if my body doesn't, right? That I can exist without my body, therefore I am not identical to my body. So, the key premise here is the premise that I can exist without my body. And again, it simply comes down to the conceivability possibility principle. If we can say, all we have to do is just imagine somebody existing without a body. And again, we do this all the time, right? Harry Potter, right? We imagine Harry Potter, we imagine ghosts, right? Dumbledore, we imagine Dumbledore existing, even though Dumbledore is dead, right? Even though Dumbledore doesn't have a body. Right? Or when we get any kind of ghost or spirit in Harry Potter, right? We're thinking about something existing and thinking, but without a body. Or if you want to go really old school, we can think about Casper the Friendly Ghost, or like when Bill Cosby was in Ghost Dad, or Patrick Swayze in Ghost. In all of these cases, we're thinking about a person existing without a body. If we can simply conceive of that, if that is a mental possibility for you, then you've established you can conceive of existing without your body, which makes it possible that you can exist without your body, which means you aren't the same thing as your body, right? Which is all Descartes needs to get his substance dualism off the ground. So, again, to wrap up, what we find in Meditation 6 is Descartes establishing, 1, that we can have some faith that the world outside of us exists, even if we can't have the kind of indubitable knowledge of it that he wants for stuff like math. That's 1. 2, that I exist as a thinking thing attached to a body. So, I am the thinking thing. I am my mind, but I am not my body. My mind is merely attached to a body, but my mind isn't a body, nor am I that body, right? I am my mind that's attached in some way to a body that moves about the world, like robots. So, in the next clip, we're going to take a look at Chisholm's view about, sorry about that, my phone rang. Take a look at Chisholm's view about free will, and we will, and then we'll tie what we've talked about this past week to the package view that we're criticizing.